A few months back, I read an article for an upcoming game called Trepang2. It was touted as a spiritual successor of FEAR, which is one of my favorite shooters of all time. It said that the developers were going for a brutal, gory, fast-paced first-person shooter, complete with all the slow motion we can handle. I was immediately interested. Well, Trepang2 just came out, and I bought it immediately at noon on 6/21/23, which was release day. I can't tell you the last time I bought a brand new game. Was it worth the $30? Absolutely. You start the game as an unnamed prisoner, sitting in a chair in what seems to be an intro that is very, very similar to the original FEAR. A gunshot is heard, the screen in front of you shatters, and you get up. You eventually find out your codename is 106, and your first mission is to simply escape the prison that you found yourself in. After escaping, you are brought to a bunker where your faction hides. You are up against the Horizon Corporation, a company that you later find out is up to some heinous deeds to attempt to make the world a better place. As you won't stand for that, you set to take down the CEO, one Anton Lazar, who I feel was designed to look a bit like Jeff Bezos. Maybe it's just me though. Trepang2 is a very fast-paced game, right from the start. You initially only have a basic pistol, but very soon after you're introduced to a submachine gun, shotgun, and assault rifle. And you will immediately see just how bloody this game can be. Heads will pop, bucket loads of blood will be spilled, limbs may go missing, skin will burn. It's actually insane at times how much action you might be involved in. But even so, you never feel out of control. The controls are fluid enough to make anything you want to do happen. Sliding no longer requires you to sprint first, instead delegated to the left Alt key. Melee attacks are a simple right click away. You can jump and do a single kick, or run first and do a double-legged missile drop kick, effectively putting space between you and your enemy. Some weapons do allow you to zoom in, such as the sniper rifle and the assault rifle with a scope, but for the most part, you are relying on your hip firing. This doesn't take anything away from the game whatsoever though. In fact, the simplicity might make the gunplay even more fun. I will say that there really aren't a lot of guns in the game. A pistol, SMG, assault rifle, sniper rifle, some grenade launchers, a minigun, and best of all, shotguns. Each weapon does feel useful in their own way. So you probably won't run into a lot of situations where you find weapons and think, man, I don't want this. And in a real kick-ass design choice, every weapon can be dual-wielded once you get to a certain point in the game. Carrying dual pistols or SMGs is pretty nifty, even with the penalties to recoil and reload times. But 2 shotguns? 106 just shows how badass he is, firing each shotgun separately and pumping them with one hand. Add in the optional incendiary rounds, and it's just devastating to watch in slow motion. Yes, slow motion is definitely a thing in Trepang2, and here, it might be even cooler looking than in the original FEAR. I know, FEAR came out in like 2005, so we're almost 20 years later, but I still feel the game looks amazing. But Trepang2 feels like a true sequel. In order to access your slow motion, here called focus, you just press Q. Everything slows down with you moving at real time, and watch individual bullets fly, blood gush, pages float around, and so on. Just like in FEAR, the environments are designed to make every combat engagement a spectacle. Yes, it looks amazing even without using your focus, but the focus just made my jaw drop at times. You'll be using it a lot, even if you don't need to focus just to get out of a hairy situation, just because it makes the gunplay even more satisfying. In addition to the focus, you also have a cloak mechanic. Personally, I didn't find this to be nearly as useful. It's a one-time use that requires a full charge regardless on how much of it you use. With the cloak, you can stealthily sneak up on a foe, grab them, and use them as a human shield. I mean, you can do this anytime you stun an enemy, such as when they take a ton of damage and are near death, and sure, it can be useful. And when you are done with them, you can either smash them in the head with your fist, or even cooler, toss them across the room, similar in design to Crysis. Maybe you can get more use out of the cloak, but personally, I didn't find it to be too beneficial. Speaking of Crysis, there is a weapon upgrade system that kind of feels like it came from that game. You cannot swap weapon attachments at any time like you can in Crysis, but instead you just need to find the weapon upgrade crates that are littered throughout the stages. It doesn't stop there. In order to actually use these attachments, you must find their cases in the various stages. The game does helpfully tell you what stages the upgrades are featured in, so that's pretty cool. Once you find them, you can use them. Many of them are right in the open, but some of them do require you to do a bit of searching. The game is very linear though, so you don't have to do a lot of exploring. I kind of already said that the combat is an amazing visual experience, but I do want to talk about the graphics in general. It's no secret that the game boasts a lot of crimson liquid, otherwise known as blood. Blasting heads results in a ton of it, and if you are in slow motion, you can even see individual droplets raining from the sky. Blood will actually cover your weapons too, which is pretty freaking awesome. There are plenty of areas where there are also objects to break. Glass panes, alcohol bottles, computer monitors, individual books and shelves, lights. So much can be destroyed and you're practically invited to do so. The stages themselves can be hit or miss. On one hand, you have the Pandora Institute, a fancy high-end office structure that is fun to blast through. There's this cultist's hideout, a stage that takes place in an English castle, complete with suicidal monks that light themselves on fire in an attempt to engulf you. There's also a cool Arctic stage where you start off with a gas mask, but find a bit of horrific sights waiting for you. But the game does not start off on the right foot, as the first level is a bland trek out of the Alaska prison that you found yourself in at the start of the game. The corridors are plain brick walls, there's hardly any light, at least at first, and it just doesn't properly convey the excellence of the later stages. Thankfully, it picks up quickly, but I couldn't help but notice how drab the opening is. Speaking of the stages, it brings me to my real only complaint about the game. It is criminally short. If you ignore the 6 side missions, which I'll get to shortly, there are only 5 levels, with each taking an hour or possibly less to complete. This means that you can theoretically finish this game in probably 3 to 5 hours. Me personally, I did it in 5. It's a bit disappointing, as I just wanted more. But again, there are some unlockable side missions that you can complete. These are somewhat fun diversions. The first 2 are simple survival wave style modes in which you are tasked with hacking terminals and taking out the opposition. There is one where you are just killing enemies around a downed aircraft, which I personally found a bit boring as I thought I was running around more than I was shooting. There's a mission where you need to eradicate a rogue cultist base in a dark underground cavern, tearing apart wooden structures as you go. All of them end up being simple, kill all the enemies until you're done with your objectives kind of deals. There are decent ways to kill time, but again, I personally would have preferred more main story levels. In the original FEAR, there was a bit of an emphasis on horror, but in Trepang2, there really isn't much of that to be seen. The Siberian level has a bit going on to get you on edge, and there is a side mission in which you explore an abandoned basement in the middle of nowhere, but other than that, the game focuses more on the action than scares. But that's fine, as not having the random booze makes the game feel a bit more of its own thing rather than a flat-out plagiarized version of FEAR. One last thing I do want to mention is that there is no multiplayer in Trepang2. Honestly, I felt like this was kind of refreshing. Most games anymore almost feel like the single-player stuff is an afterthought to the online components, so to be able to play a game solo without any kind of options to play with others was an unusual change from the norm. Granted, I don't know how the developers would have implemented any kind of online features with the slow motion and all, but I'm sure they could have figured something out, because FEAR had multiplayer and that was pretty fun. Trepang2 might be way too short of a game, but this short game is a literal blast to play from start to finish. Excellent graphics, an appropriately rocking soundtrack, the slow motion to overcome the odds, fun melee options. This game hits all the check marks when it comes to FPS gaming. There's nothing like doing a triple jump kick to 3 different enemies without hitting the ground once, or jumping in slow motion to the ground and hurling an axe at an enemy's head while falling. If you're interested in the bare-bones story, there's plenty of intel to find, along with the various weapon upgrades and cheats that can be found and unlocked. And if you are a glutton for punishment, there's the Rage mode, where the game literally tells you enemies have eyes on the back of their heads, instant reaction times, and near-perfect accuracy. One day I might have to stream that to see how far I can get. Until then, you should totally play Trepang2 if you're into shooters, and it is just plain fun. Final score? 7 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.